I never thought coming back to the lake house that I once called home would end up being the moment I saw my entire world crumble. I had driven 6 hours straight to my husband's will reading. It'd only been 2 weeks since he passed. Although we chose to live separately during the last few years of our lives, he was the only man I ever loved. Every mile felt like I was running away from the echo of his absence and toward a home that felt more like a museum of our shared life. I thought I was going to spend the weekend cleaning up his workshop, maybe polish that old fishing boat he never finished fixing, honor him in my quiet, lonely way. I pulled up next to the shed, stepped out, and almost dropped my keys when I heard voices. I wasn't expecting anyone. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind carrying echoes from across the lake. But then I heard Brian, my only son, my baby boy, who once made me homemade Mother's Day cards with scribbled, "I love you, Mommy," in red crayon. His voice was low and sharp, slicing through the quiet. "Make sure you cut deep enough. If she loses her brakes on that hill, it'll be instant." My breath stopped. Then I heard her, his wife, that cold, thin voice I'd never fully trusted. "She's so senile, it'll look like an accident. We tell them she's been confused lately, always misplacing things, talking to her passed-away husband. No one will question it." My knees buckled. I dropped behind my car, my heart hammering so violently I thought it would give away my hiding spot. They laughed. Actually laughed. I tried to breathe quietly, but each inhale felt like swallowing broken glass. I thought of all those nights I stayed up sewing Brian's costumes for school plays. The way I skipped meals so he could have seconds when we had nothing but cheap rice and canned soup. How I held his hand through heartbreaks. How I sold my wedding ring to help with his first mortgage. And this was my reward. My son, my Brian, plotting my erasal to snatch his father's estate. The estate I had protected, maintained, and loved as much as I loved him. My son, my own Brian, already plotting to seize his father's estate. Suddenly I realized just how alone I truly was. All the years I thought I was building a family, I was actually building a stage for my own humiliation. They didn't love me, they loved what they could get from me. I clutched the charm bracelet my husband gave me on our last anniversary, a tiny silver fish, a miniature book, a heart-shaped locket. Each charm was a memory, a promise. And I wasn't ready to become one of his ghost stories. I pressed my forehead to the cold metal of my car, swallowing back the scream clawing at my throat. I knew then I wouldn't let them do this. I wouldn't let them tarnish his memory, not while I still draw breath. I heard his wife's voice again, dripping with poison. "We'll say she started forgetting things a while ago. Everyone's already half convinced she's lost it since Harold died. You know how she talks to his ghost by the lake? Who's going to question it when she finally forgets how to brake on a mountain road?" My chest tightened so sharply I thought my ribs would splinter. And yet, as I listened to them plot my end like two crows circling a carcass, something inside me flickered. Not rage yet. No, not quite. It was something smaller, something quieter, like a single match in a dark room, a realization. I stayed there until I heard them walk back toward the house, their voices fading into low murmurs. My legs were numb when I finally stood. I pressed my palms to my cheeks, felt the tears, and tasted the salt on my lips. I didn't have the answer then, but for the first time, I wanted to find out. I sat in the driver's seat, doors locked, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. Every inch of my body felt foreign, as if I'd woken up inside someone else's skin. My heart thudded against my ribs like a trapped animal. I closed my eyes and saw Brian at 5 years old, running across the yard in overalls, a dandelion crown I'd made for him slipping over one eye. "Look, Mama, I'm a king," he squealed, his small arms wide open, waiting for me to scoop him up. I saw him at 14, awkward and lanky, when he brought home that sharp-eyed girl, the one who rolled her eyes at my homemade spaghetti sauce and whispered behind my back. That day, I thought she was just a teenager testing boundaries. But now, I realize it was the first sign that something had shifted in him. I remembered every sacrifice, each one now feeling like another knife twisted between my ribs. I gripped the charm bracelet so hard it left an imprint on my palm. It was Harold's final gift to me. He had chosen each charm to tell our story. The tiny book, because I loved reading aloud in bed. The silver fish for our lake trips. The heart-shaped locket for the promise he made to always come back home. I had clung to that promise even after he died. I believed he was still with me, that somehow his love would keep me safe, keep us whole. But now, I could see how my blind love had become my undoing. Brian didn't just turn cold overnight. It happened slowly. A joke here, a snide remark there, each one slicing away at the boy I once knew. And every time I swallowed it down, telling myself he was just stressed, just tired, I handed over another piece of myself. I thought love meant patience, that it meant forgiving without limits. But sitting there in that car, surrounded by the echo of their laughter, I realized love without respect is just slow self-destruction. I opened my eyes and saw my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back looked ancient, hollow. "Who are you?" I whispered. "A mother who gave too much and asked for nothing. A wife who kept the house warm but let her own dreams gather dust in the attic. A woman who kept waiting for her son to come home to her when he had left years ago." A sudden gust of wind rattled the car, like Harold knocking on the door of my heart. "You were strong once," I imagined him saying. "You can be strong again." I took a deep, shaky breath. For the first time, I didn't feel like crying. I felt like clawing my way back to the surface. I didn't know where to go, or even who to call. The house that used to be my sanctuary now felt like a wolf's den. I couldn't bring myself to step inside, not with their voices still echoing in my head. Then, I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. My heart jolted, thinking they had come looking for me. Maybe to finish what they started. I ducked behind the car again, my breath ragged. "Marjorie?" That voice. It wasn't Brian's sharp bark or his wife's poison-laced whine. It was softer, familiar, lined with years and kindness. I peeked over the hood and saw Evelyn, my old neighbor. She stood there in her worn garden boots, her frizzy gray hair pinned back haphazardly, as if she'd dropped everything to come find me. She took one look at my face, and her own softened like warm dough. "Oh, honey," she breathed. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, my whole body gave out, and I crumpled to the ground. Evelyn rushed over, her arms surprisingly strong as she helped me up. "Let's get you out of here," she said firmly, guiding me toward her old station wagon parked by the road. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I let her steer me like a broken marionette. As she settled me into the passenger seat and buckled me in, I finally found my voice, though it was no more than a whisper. "They want me gone, Evelyn." Her hands stilled, hovering near my face. She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. Her eyes just hardened in that quiet, determined way only women who've been through storms can understand. "Then you're coming home with me," she said, shutting the door with a final thud that echoed like a vow. We drove in silence, the road blurring past. Every so often she reached over and squeezed my hand. That small gesture felt like an anchor, keeping me from drifting off into the dark sea of my thoughts. When we got to her house, she helped me inside and sat me down at her round oak kitchen table. The kettle was already on, before I even realized she had moved. She poured the tea, her hands steady, then set the cup in front of me. "Drink," she commanded softly. I wrapped my fingers around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my bones. As I took that first sip, something inside me shifted. Just a little, like the smallest crack of sunlight after a long storm. "I don't know what to do," I finally croaked. Evelyn placed her hand over mine. "You don't have to know today," she said. "Today, you're safe. We'll figure the rest out together." Her words settled into my chest like a balm. For so long, I had carried everything alone. The grief, the sacrifices, the betrayals. But in that kitchen, with Evelyn's gentle strength surrounding me, I realized I didn't have to keep doing it alone. Maybe, just maybe, I still had a chance to reclaim my story. Across from me, Evelyn moved slowly around her kitchen, her movements confident and sure, like she'd done this 1,000 times. She opened a cookie tin, pushed it toward me, and I took one without thinking. The sugar melted on my tongue, but I barely tasted it. Evelyn finally sat down, sighing as she studied me. "I saw your car by the shed," she said, her voice gentle but probing. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost." I wanted to tell her everything, every vile word I heard, every plan they made. But as I opened my mouth, my mind flooded with memories instead. I glanced over her shoulder and noticed a photo on the mantel. A young Brian, no older than 15, standing next to that girl, his future wife, at the local school fair. I remembered that day. I remembered how she looked at my homemade caramel apples, wrinkling her nose as if they stank. How she leaned into Brian's ear, whispering something that made him snicker, even as he looked down to avoid my eyes. I thought back to Thanksgiving dinners, the way she would push aside my dishes with a forced smile and say, "Oh, I'm watching my carbs," before making a plate of only the store-bought rolls. How she'd watch me serve Brian seconds, her eyes sharp, assessing, always taking silent notes. There were other moments, too, small but sharp as splinters. Brian coming home late, reeking of expensive perfume that wasn't mine, his voice suddenly colder whenever I asked simple questions. His arms folding across his chest like a fortress. I thought I was losing him to the world, to adulthood. I told myself it was normal. But now, sitting in Evelyn's kitchen, I realized she had been pulling him away piece by piece, like threads from an old sweater. "You always gave too much," Evelyn murmured, reading my silence, "and they took until there was nothing left to give." I stared down at the bracelet on my wrist. The tiny charms caught the light. The book, the fish, the heart. I remembered giving Brian a charm bracelet once, too, a simpler, childish one with plastic stars. He had giggled, calling himself Space Captain, spinning around the living room while I clapped. Where did that boy go? When did he vanish, replaced by this hollow-eyed man who could talk about my death like a business transaction? I swallowed the tight lump in my throat. Maybe I was the fool, I said, my voice trembling. Maybe I wanted to believe love was enough to fix everything. That if I kept giving, he'd remember the mother who loved him more than her own breath. Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her skin was warm and dry, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. "You weren't a fool," she said firmly. "You were a mother, and now you have to be a woman who survives." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the lines on her face, the quiet fire in her eyes. She wasn't telling me to forgive. She wasn't telling me to forget. She was telling me to fight. Then my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with his name, Brian. I felt my stomach twist so sharply I thought I'd be sick. I pressed answer, forcing my voice into that small, uncertain tremor he expected from me. "Hi, Brian?" "Mom," he said, too casual, too smooth. "I saw your car at the house. Everything okay? Where'd you run off to?" I swallowed, letting my silence stretch just long enough to make him lean in. That predator's patience he thought he had perfected. I didn't want to be alone in the house, I said, my voice cracking on purpose. "I went to stay with my friend Evelyn for a night. I just needed company. You know how the house feels after your father?" I heard the pause on the line. Quick, calculating. "Oh, right. Of course," he said finally, a small sigh of relief bleeding into his tone. "You should come back soon, though," he said, his voice dripping with forced warmth. "People might worry. You might get confused." My heart thudded against my ribs. I forced out a shaky laugh. "You're right. I shouldn't strain myself. I'll be careful." We hung up, and I set the phone down carefully on the table, as if it might explode. Evelyn, who had been quietly watching from across the room, stepped forward and took my hand. "He thinks you're walking right into it," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. I nodded. "And he needs to keep thinking that." By next morning, the resolve that had sparked under the moonlight hadn't faded. Instead, it sat steady in my chest like a low burning coal, warming me in ways I hadn't felt in years. Evelyn made eggs and toast, moving around the kitchen, humming an old hymn under her breath. Every now and then, she'd glance at me, as if to check that I hadn't drifted back into that hollow shell she found yesterday. "I'm going to the village today," I told her after breakfast, my voice surprisingly firm. She set down her mug slowly. "Are you sure you're ready?" I nodded. "I need to move. I can't just sit here, waiting for them to decide when to finish me off." She stared at me for a moment, her eyes narrowing in that sharp, knowing way. Then she nodded. "All right, but promise me. Be careful, and come straight back here." As I pulled on my old jacket and slipped my keys into my pocket, I looked in the mirror by her door. My face was puffy from crying, my hair a mess, but beneath it there was a steadiness I almost didn't recognize. I took Evelyn's car and drove into town on the back roads, avoiding the main highway. When I finally parked by the mechanic's shop, I felt strangely calm. I stepped inside, and the smell of oil and old rubber hit me like a wave of memory. Pete, the local mechanic, looked up from under a pickup hood and squinted. "Marjorie? Ain't seen you here in years." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice not to tremble. "Pete, could you check my car today?" Quietly. "I think someone tampered with it." His eyebrows shot up. "Tampered? Who'd do a thing like that?" I opened my mouth to answer, but stopped. This wasn't the place for full confessions. Not yet. I just pressed the keys into his calloused hand. "Please, just check. It's at my house." He held my gaze a second longer, then nodded. "Leave it to me. You walking back?" I nodded again, grateful for the small town that had always offered me kindness, even if I hadn't always seen it. On my way back through the village, I ducked into a small shop and bought a pocket-sized voice recorder. My hands trembled slightly as I paid. It felt almost like buying a weapon. As I walked, I rehearsed lines in my head. How I'd ask Brian seemingly innocent questions at dinner. How I'd keep my voice soft, let him feel safe enough to boast, to reveal himself. How I'd slip the recorder into my pocket and act as if I was still the naive mother he thought he knew. Each step felt like learning to walk all over again, fragile, uncertain, but determined. When I finally reached Evelyn's, she was standing on the porch waiting, her eyes scanning the road anxiously. I raised the recorder in my hand, like a small, silent flag of war. She nodded once, a tight smile breaking over her face. "You're stronger than you think," she said. I stepped up to her, feeling the weight of my decision settle into my bones. "No," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "I'm exactly as strong as I was always meant to be. I just forgot." And that afternoon, as I sat with Evelyn planning my quiet confrontation, I felt something new bloom in my chest. Not fear, not grief, but a steady, defiant readiness. Pete called late that afternoon. I answered on the first ring, my fingers clenched so tight around the phone I heard the plastic crack. "Marjorie," he said, his voice low and grave. "You were right to be worried. Your brake lines were sliced nearly clean through. Another few miles and they'd have failed completely." The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of Evelyn's kitchen counter, staring at the chipped ceramic mug I'd left there earlier. They really meant to finish me," I said, my voice thin as paper. Pete cleared his throat, hesitating as if he was speaking to a woman on the edge of a cliff. "I can fix it today, no charge. But you should talk to the sheriff." "No," I said quickly, my words surprising even me. "Not yet. Thank you, Pete. Just fix it. Quietly." When I hung up, Evelyn came up behind me, pressing a hand to my back. "You have the proof now," she said gently. I nodded, staring at nothing. My mind had already started spinning, connecting dots I had refused to look at for years. Brian must have realized I hadn't driven away that morning. He probably started weaving his next trap the second he noticed my car hadn't disappeared down that hill. And I knew exactly how he'd do it, through whispers to the family, late-night calls to cousins and aunts. "Mom's losing her mind," he'd say. "She's confused, might hurt herself. We're worried sick." A chill shivered down my spine. I imagined them gathering around their dinner table, shaking their heads solemnly, while Brian played the concerned son. Meanwhile, the woman they labeled confused was standing right here, staring her own death in the face with open eyes. Evelyn handed me a glass of water. I took a small sip, feeling it slide down my throat like a stone. "You can't stay quiet forever," she said, searching my face. "I know," I whispered, "but I need them to show their cards first. They think I'm weak. Let them keep thinking it." I pulled the voice recorder from my pocket, turning it over in my hands like a talisman. That night, as I lay on Evelyn's lumpy guest bed, I listened to the lake outside the window and imagined Brian in my kitchen, telling his wife to cut deeper into the brake lines. I imagined her smirking, her eyes sharp and glittering. The recorder sat on the nightstand, its small red light a tiny sentinel. I pictured myself at the dinner table, asking him, "Why did you want me gone so badly?" Watching his face twist, waiting for that fatal slip, the arrogance that would finally betray him. My heart thundered, but beneath it was something else now, a pulse of purpose. Before drifting off, I remembered the question I had asked Harold by the lake. Did I fail him? That night, for the first time, I realized I had been asking the wrong question. The real question wasn't whether I had failed Brian. It was whether I was finally ready to stop failing myself. And as the moon cast its pale light over Evelyn's yard, I knew my answer. The next morning, Evelyn drove me to the house. The house stood silent, the lake shimmering behind it as if nothing had ever happened. I walked up the steps, recorder already humming quietly in my pocket. My fingers trembled as I twisted the doorknob. Inside, I found them in the kitchen. Brian sat at the table, sipping coffee, his wife flipping through a gardening magazine like she didn't have a death on her conscience. Brian looked up, feigning surprise. "Mom! You're back early. We thought you were resting at Evelyn's for a few days." I forced a small, wobbly smile. "Oh, I missed my own bed." My voice cracked perfectly. My years of swallowing pain had trained me well. His wife didn't look up, but I saw the way her jaw tightened. Brian stood and put an arm around my shoulders, the same arm that once held me when he had nightmares as a boy. Now, it felt like a snake curling around my throat. "You should sit," he said gently, guiding me to a chair. "You look tired, Mom. Confused, even. We've all been so worried about you lately." I stared at my hands folded in my lap. "Worried?" I echoed, letting my voice drift. "Of course," he continued. "We just want what's best for you. You know, maybe it's time to think about getting some professional help. Maybe even consider moving somewhere safe." I lifted my eyes to him then, letting them fill with tears I didn't have to fake. "Safe." His wife finally looked up, her smile a thin, cruel line. "You deserve peace, Marjorie. Maybe a place where you don't have to think so much, where people can take care of you properly. A place where I could be silenced, controlled, forgotten." I shivered, clutching my cardigan tighter, my fingers brushing the recorder hidden beneath. Brian knelt beside me, putting on his best concerned son act. "We can help you get settled, handle all the paperwork. We'll keep the estate in order while you focus on your health." I stared at him for a long moment, searching for even a flicker of the boy I once knew. But there was nothing left. Inside, something shifted. My fear shrank just a little, making room for a rising sense of clarity. "Thank you," I whispered, patting his cheek like he used to beg me to when he was sick. I just need a little time to think." He nodded, his face lighting up as if he'd already won. I stood slowly, letting my hands tremble, playing my part so well I almost believed it myself. I just need to go freshen up," I whispered. "All this talk, it's overwhelming." Brian helped me up, nodding like the benevolent son he wished the world would see. I shuffled away toward the stairs, my head bowed. But as soon as I reached the hallway, I straightened my back and slipped behind the corner, just out of their sight. My fingers found the recorder in my cardigan pocket, and I pressed it on, my thumb shaking but sure. "We really thought she'd be gone by now," she hissed. "I told you, that hill would have taken care of it. But she's so stubborn, she doesn't even know when it's time to bow out gracefully." Brian scoffed, rolling his eyes. "It doesn't matter. We'll push her again soon. She'll break eventually." My fingers clenched so tight around the recorder, I thought it might shatter. But outside, I stayed perfectly still, the picture of a fragile, clueless old woman. They kept going, oblivious. By next month, this place is ours. She'll either crash or we'll get her committed. Either way, we win, Brian said, laughing softly. As I stood and shuffled out of the room, I felt the recorder heavy in my pocket. Heavier than 1,000 bricks. Heavier than all my regrets. Upstairs in my old bedroom, I closed the door softly behind me. I pulled the recorder out and played it back, hearing every deceitful word they had just spoken. My hands trembled, but this time not from fear, from rage, from vindication. When I could finally breathe again, I slipped the recorder into my old jewelry box. My fingers brushed against the velvet pouch holding Harold's final letter, the one I had tucked away after his funeral, too afraid to open, too afraid to face all the words I'd never hear him say again. Tonight, I opened it. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly smudged from the tears I must have cried over it back then. Margie, if you're reading this, I know you're alone now. And I know our boy. He's not the man you hoped he'd become. I saw it long before you could bear to look. He's always been so hungry for more, so quick to turn cold when something stood in his way. I don't want you to carry my silence as approval. I only stayed quiet to keep you from breaking. But if he ever crosses that final line, don't forgive him. Protect yourself. You were always stronger than you believed. Promise me you'll choose yourself first. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the sobs rip through me. For the first time, I didn't swallow them or smooth them into polite silence. I let them come, raw and heaving, until my ribs ached and my throat burned. When the storm finally calmed, I looked around my room. The same room where I had nursed Brian through fevers, wrapped Christmas gifts in secret, wrote in my journals late at night so Harold wouldn't worry. Every inch of it was soaked in memories that now felt like shards under my skin. I opened my closet and found the old shoebox where I kept every drawing Brian had made as a child. Crayon scribbles of me with big hair and wide smiles, always labeled, "My mommy." Each one a lie now, a quiet ghost that asked, "Was it ever real?" I set the box on the floor and closed the lid. Slowly, I pulled out a small suitcase and started packing. The bracelet, Harold's letter, the recorder, a few clothes. Downstairs, I could hear Brian and his wife laughing softly over dinner, as if they were already celebrating the inheritance they thought was theirs. As if I was already a memory to be packed away in their carefully curated story. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Before I left the room, I glanced in the mirror one last time. I didn't look like the ghost they wanted me to be. I looked like a woman sharpening her blade in the dark. I slipped the recorder into my pocket, zipped the suitcase shut, and headed quietly down the stairs. In the hallway, I paused. Brian looked up from his plate, surprise flickering across his face. "Going somewhere, Mom?" he asked, feigning concern. I forced a small, tight smile. "I need some air." "Don't wait up." I forced a small, tight smile. "Evelyn's taking me out again today. I can't stay in this house. It's unbearable since Harold died. I won't be long. Don't wait up." He looked visibly irritated that time, but he only said, "Okay." At dawn, we drove to the one place I knew I could trust, Harold's old lawyer. Mr. Grayson had retired years ago, but his son had taken over the practice. I had always thought of them as just family acquaintances, but in that moment, they felt like my last lifeline. I sat in that waiting room, the ticking clock on the wall matching the drum of my heart. When Thomas Grayson finally called me in, I looked him straight in the eyes and saw Harold's quiet trust reflected back. I set the recorder on the table between us. "I need your help," I said, my voice even. "My son tried to finish me, and I have proof." Thomas listened to the recordings twice, his brows knitting tighter each time. When he finally looked up at me, his face was pale with disbelief. "I knew Brian had ambitions," he said slowly. "But this is over the line, Marjorie." Hearing it said out loud, so plainly, almost knocked the wind out of me. But instead of shrinking, I felt my spine straighten. "What can we do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Thomas leaned forward, tapping the recorder with one finger. "First, we need to secure your safety, somewhere they can't find you. Second, we'll file for an emergency injunction to freeze the estate and block any changes Brian might try to make. Third, we'll prepare to bring this to the authorities. I nodded, each step landing in my mind like nails securing a wooden beam. There's something else, I said, reaching into my purse. I handed him Harold's letter. He read it carefully, his eyes softening as he scanned the old, trembling handwriting. This strengthens everything, he said. It shows your husband feared this exact outcome and wanted to protect you. The more he spoke, the more the fog inside me cleared. All those years I'd spent seeing my silence as love, they were gone. In their place was a single bright truth. They loved my money more than me. When Thomas mentioned rewriting certain clauses of Harold's will, my fingers twitched against my skirt. Can we make it so Brian can't contest anything? Not just take away his inheritance, but make it ironclad? Thomas's mouth curved into a thin, determined line. Absolutely. We'll include a forfeiture clause. Any heir who engages in fraud or violence forfeits everything, and we can set aside protective assets under your direct control. A slow, trembling relief washed over me. For the first time, I realized I could protect myself without having to beg for scraps of kindness. Do it, I said. Thomas nodded firmly. I'll file the paperwork today. You'll stay at a safe location tonight. I can arrange a private residence, or… Evelyn, I said immediately. I trust her. He gave a small smile. Then Evelyn it is. As I left the office, I felt the sun warm my face. It felt almost foreign on my skin, like I'd been living underground for decades. I drove back to Evelyn's in a daze, my hands gripping the wheel, not from fear now, but from focus. I parked and stepped out, and there she was, standing on the porch, arms folded, waiting. She didn't ask questions as I walked up. Instead, she opened her arms, and I fell into them. Quiet doesn't mean weak, she whispered in my ear, echoing Harold's words, as if she'd pulled them right from my memory. I pulled back and looked at her, truly looked. In her lined face, I saw every sacrifice I had made. But I also saw what I might become, a woman who survives because she chooses herself every single day. Tomorrow, I whispered, my voice trembling with something almost like excitement. Tomorrow, we start. Evelyn nodded. We start. That night, I lay in her guest room, staring at the ceiling, the charm bracelet still tight around my wrist. I didn't know exactly how it would all unfold, but for the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like a storm gathering on the edge of the lake, silent, patient, and absolutely unstoppable. The next morning arrived soft and gray, a gentle fog rolling off the lake like a blanket pulled over old wounds. But inside Evelyn's kitchen, the air buzzed with quiet electricity. I dressed slowly, choosing my best cardigan, Harold's favorite, the deep blue one that made my eyes look bright even on my worst days. I pinned my hair back neatly, every movement deliberate. Evelyn poured coffee, her hands steady. She watched me from across the table, her eyes sharp, her mouth tight, with something like pride. You look like you're going to a coronation, she said, her voice low. Maybe I am, I replied. A coronation for a woman who finally chose herself. We shared a small, knowing smile. I checked my bag again. The recorder, Harold's letter, the updated legal documents from Thomas. I could practically feel Harold's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. By 9 o'clock, Thomas arrived with 2 police officers in plain clothes. He explained they'd stay outside during the reading of the will. No guns drawn, no grand displays, just silent watchers waiting for the moment they would be needed. I nodded, my heart hammering so loud I thought everyone in the room could hear it. But beneath that fear, something else thrummed. Readiness. We drove to the estate in separate cars. As I approached the driveway, I saw Brian's car already parked there. My stomach twisted, but I kept driving forward. I stepped out slowly, feeling each piece of gravel under my feet like an anchor to the earth. Brian stood at the top of the porch steps, his face twisted into that false concerned smile. His wife hovered behind him, her arms crossed, her eyes darting nervously. "Mom!" Brian called, coming down the steps quickly. "I was just about to call you. We thought you might need help with…" I raised my hand, and to my surprise, he actually stopped. The silence that felt thick enough to choke on. Behind me, Thomas and the lawyer's assistant followed, carrying the sealed documents. Brian's eyes flicked to them, a quick flash of unease crossing his face before he caught himself. Inside, we gathered in the main sitting room, the same room where Harold used to read the paper on Sunday mornings, where Brian played on the rug as a boy. Brian took a seat in the front, leaning back as if he already owned the place, his wife perched beside him, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I didn't sit. I stood near the window, staring out at the lake, letting the memories rush through me. The sound of Harold's laughter, the scent of early morning coffee, the echoes of a life I thought was safe. When the lawyer cleared his throat, everyone turned to face him. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice measured. "Today we are here to finalize and execute the last will and testament of the late Harold Winslow." Brian smirked, his fingers drumming against his knee. I recognized that look, the same one he used to give when he knew he'd gotten away with a lie as a child. I turned slowly, letting my eyes settle on him. For a moment, he looked at me the way he used to look at a stranger on the street, like I was nobody, and that was when I knew. This wasn't just revenge, it was reclamation. I folded my hands calmly, feeling the weight of the bracelet against my skin. I was no longer begging for scraps of love. I was here to take back my story. The lawyer took a deep breath and began reading. And as he spoke each word, I felt the storm inside me coiling tighter, waiting for the moment to break. The lawyer's voice droned on, detailing small bequests, old debts paid, charitable donations Harold had arranged. Brian shifted in his chair, his smirk growing with each mention of assets. His fingers twitched impatiently on the armrest, as if he was already reaching for keys to a kingdom he thought was his. Finally, the lawyer paused, looked at me, and then at the recorder in my hand. I felt every eye in the room snap toward me, the tension snapping so sharp I thought I could hear it crackle in the air. I stepped forward, my legs surprisingly steady. I looked at Brian, really looked. His face was flushed, his eyes darting between me and the lawyer, his smirk faltering as the silence grew heavy. I took a deep breath, then pressed play on the recorder. The words filled the room, ugly and cold. Each syllable fell like a stone into a quiet pond, sending ripples of horror across every face. Brian's head jerked up. His mouth fell open, working soundlessly like a fish gasping on dry land. His wife shrank back into her chair, her hands trembling so badly she dropped her phone. I turned toward the rest of the family, the cousins, the distant relatives, the hangers-on who had come sniffing for a piece of Harold's estate. Their faces were pale, some pressed hands to their mouths, others shaking their heads in silent shock. For a moment, no one breathed. Brian finally found his voice, but it came out as a strangled squeak. "Mom, you don't understand. This isn't enough," I snapped, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. I turned to the lawyer. He nodded, his expression grave as he lifted a second set of papers. In accordance with Harold Winslow's original will, and under the newly added forfeiture clause protecting against fraud and violence, Brian Winslow and his spouse are hereby disinherited. Effective immediately. Gasps broke out. Brian surged forward as if to grab the papers, but two officers stepped through the doorway, blocking him. His face turned red, spit flying as he shouted, "You can't do this! I'm your son! This is my right!" I looked at him one last time. Not as my boy, not as my family, but as a man I no longer knew. "You loved the money more than you ever loved me," I said softly. "And today, you get neither." As the officers closed in, his wife started sobbing, her manicured hands clawing at his arm. Brian turned to me, his eyes wild, but I simply turned away, my fingers brushing the charms on my bracelet, each one a small, steady promise to myself. The room felt bright, alive, almost electric. For the first time in decades, I wasn't shrinking or apologizing. I was standing. As the officers stepped forward, Brian's shouts echoed off the walls, each word more desperate than the last. His wife scrambled out of her chair, her face streaked with mascara, grasping at anything. His arm, the table edge, the last shred of their crumbling illusion. The lawyer's voice sliced through their chaos, calm and resolute. Under the forfeiture clause, any heir engaging in acts of violence or fraud is immediately disqualified from receiving any part of the estate. In addition, given the evidence provided today, criminal charges will proceed. Brian lunged toward me then, a flash of the boy he used to be, twisted into something cruel and rabid. But the officers grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. He shouted my name, his voice breaking. "Mom, please, you don't understand. We just wanted what's fair." I looked at him, really looked, as if trying to see that boy with the dandelion crown one last time. But he was gone. All that remained was a grown man, his greed exposed, his love for me nothing but a tool he'd long abandoned. His wife dropped to her knees, sobbing, her cries shrill and hollow. She reached for me too, her voice trembling. "Marjorie, please. I didn't mean it. I just wanted to help Brian." "Help?" My mind hissed. They called murder help. I felt Harold's words anchor me, echoing in my heart. "Choose yourself first." I straightened my spine, letting the moment wash over me. The lawyer stepped closer and lifted another document, his voice firm but almost reverent, as if he too understood this was more than paperwork. It was a burial of betrayal, per Harold's wishes, and reaffirmed today. The remainder of the estate, including the house and all assets, remain fully and solely with Marjorie Winslow. A hush fell over the room, like the instant after a thunderclap when the air itself holds its breath. Brian was dragged from the room, his screams echoing down the hall like a dying animal. His wife tried to follow, but an officer blocked her path. Her hands fell to her sides, her sobs turning into quiet, broken hiccups. I looked at the gathered relatives, their faces pale, eyes wide. Some had come here hoping for scraps, small trinkets, perhaps a slice of land. Now they looked at me not with pity, but with something closer to fear, and, somewhere in there, respect. I turned and caught my own reflection in the large hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older, yes, but there was a sharpness in her eyes I hadn't seen since before Brian was born. In that reflection, I didn't see a victim or a broken mother. I saw a survivor, a woman who finally understood that love without respect is just a leash. I stepped forward, each movement deliberate, the charms on my bracelet clinking gently, Harold's quiet applause from the beyond. Outside, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, spilling across the porch steps. As I stood in that light, the last words of Harold's letter rang in my head. "Promise me you'll choose yourself first." And there, under that golden glow, I did. I watched from the front porch as the police car carrying Brian disappeared down the long, tree-lined drive. The sound of gravel crunching under the tires faded into the morning hush, leaving behind an eerie, delicate silence. The estate, Harold's beloved dream, my life's work, stood behind me like an old, wounded animal finally allowed to rest. I stepped down slowly, feeling each stair under my feet, the sun warming my shoulders. In my hand, I held the bracelet. I ran my thumb across the charms, the little silver fish, the tiny book, the heart-shaped locket, each one a reminder of who I had been and who I had chosen to become.